Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
Well, our KRQE political analyst predicted this in July on our show, and it was pretty clear based on just how many options Albuquerque voters had for mayor this year that we would be in a runoff election. And here we are.
Yeah, the runoff is slated for December 9th, a week away from when this episode publishes and hits the airwaves. Early voting is already underway. That started December 1st. It goes on through December 6th. And ahead of the final vote, we are returning to the mayor's race with another opportunity to hear from the two candidates.
Yeah, Mayor Tim Keller is seeking an unprecedented third straight term here in Albuquerque. He received 36% of the vote in November. His challenger, former Bernalillo County Sheriff Darren White, secured 31% of the vote. Neither reached that 50% mark that would have avoided a runoff. Both candidates accepted our invitation to return to New Mexico News Insiders. We appreciate that. We've randomly selected the order of appearance for today's show. We gave them each equal time, just so listeners and everybody knows. You'll hear our interview with Darren White first. We are here with Darren White, the former Bernalillo County Sheriff, now running against Mayor Tim Keller. You said that if you're elected, you only want to serve 4 years leading the city. Darren White, thanks for coming back on our show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so similar format. This time you'll have 20 minutes, and we're going to giving equal time to both you and your opponent. On Election Day in November, you received 31% of the vote, just 5 points behind Keller. Yeah. We know this is a nonpartisan election, but you've garnered much of the conservative voters here in Albuquerque, while Keller, we know, is a Democrat. So I wanted to ask you, how much do you think party lines matter in a local election like this one, where some of the foundational policy strategies are just so different?
Yeah, I would say probably 20 years ago it wasn't as bad, but we've become very tribal. And while it's considered a nonpartisan race, it really isn't. And that's why I've kind of said over the years, it's like, why don't we just make these things partisan? Because that's what they are. I was very pleased with the 31%, especially with 6 candidates in the race. And I was also pleased, coming within 5 points, but also recognizing that the mayor seems to be stuck right around that 35, 36% in the polls that we've seen leading up to the general election. What you have is you've had 2/3 of the people with an 8-year incumbent that said, we're backing somebody else this time. Now, I'm not going to be ridiculous and say, well, I'm going to get all of them, because I'm not. But I think people are really paying attention because they recognize that the consequences of this election are significant. And so we're very, very pleased, regardless of whether it's partisan or not. You want to get... It's important for me, it's to get my message out and to talk about change. And the last thing I'll say to this... What this election is about to me, it's a referendum on the mayor. 8 years in office, and has a record now that a lot of people have said, clearly 2/3 of the people said that not this time. And so, but we get our message out to everyone. We communicate with everyone because, at the end of the day, when you become an elected leader, you don't represent one party. You represent everyone. But that's kind of how it's become over the years. Very, very tribal. But I think this time Democrats are going to give me a second look because the mayor has failed. He's failed in so many areas. And it's also the reason why I only want to serve 4 years. I'm not trying to pad my political resume. We all know you don't punch your ticket to higher office with the mayor because I don't think it's ever happened. And so I'm not interested in that. I want to do 4 years, roll up my sleeves, get in there, clean it up, and get out.
So you and Mayor Keller, by the time this episode publishes, you'll have made your rounds on the 3 TV stations, 3 different debates, including one on KRQE, which airs December 1st. Something that comes up in one of these, in the prior debates, something that's come up in the prior debates is criticism around what you've said about how to deal with crime and homelessness. So specifically, there's that line, taking the gloves off in addressing Albuquerque's homelessness problem, and then also, quote, unshackling the police in the work that they do.
Now, I never said the shackling. The deal about the gloves coming off was an email. We were there was a situation at 4th and Central. There was a group that came in and they were feeding the homeless right there in the plaza. And they didn't have permits. They didn't have anything. Well, we were getting complaints from those business owners because there's hundreds of people, and it's the same thing. They were doing things that made it very hard for those businesses to serve their patrons. And so we told them time and time again, you got to do this. Look, I'll even tell you, I offered them a place to go with Jeremy Reynolds, the late Jeremy Reynolds. We all know all the good work. Yes. And so I worked with him to say, can we find a place that's not right where these businesses are? We talk about downtown and revitalizing downtown. There were 300-400 homeless people right there. And I can't remember the name, but it was the restaurant that was right on the McElvee's, I think it was called. Look, they were having to shut down their outdoor seating area. They were losing business. And what I said to one of the lieutenants is, we did everything that we possibly could. It's time to take the gloves off. And meaning that, look, I'm a Christian and my faith is very important to me and I'm compassionate, but I was trying to resolve a situation where we could at least meet the needs of the homeless so they could get fed a few blocks away, but also respect the business owners in that area who were struggling. And look at what we're dealing with right now. It's the same thing. Mayor Keller said last night, there was a comment that was made by Mayor Chavez last year that said it was a cesspool of crime, drugs, and murder in that area. And I said that. And the mayor got all offended and said, there are families that live in that international district and there's business. Exactly my point, Mayor. Why have you turned your back on these families in the international district? He's the one that named it. And you have they are now living in filth. They're having to contend their children with needles and open air drug use, fentanyl. And the other thing we're seeing now is that people are ODing. They're dying on our streets. And you tell me you're worried because the mayor of Albuquerque, the former mayor, called it a cesspool, and you're offended by that, but yet you won't help those families out. He's turned his back on them. And look at the businesses. I say businesses are trying to survive. Look how many businesses have failed. Griff's Hamburgers, 60 years in business, beloved by Albuquerque. They shut down. And the reason they shut down, they said it was no longer safe for their customers.
I want to ask you, though, to that point of sort of taking the gloves off. I think there's an impression, right, that some say perhaps what Mr. White is saying is that he wants to get more aggressive with the use of police out there. So responding to perhaps, and I guess it's fair game for you to obviously say what you sort of mean by that if it's on a broader level as well, because obviously you gave context to the history of that quote. But how do you respond to the idea that perhaps the DOJ was here in part due to what they called an unconstitutional use of force?
But how is it unconstitutional when you enforce your law? The law right now on the book says that you cannot camp on our streets, on our sidewalks, and in our parks. That has been the law for a long time. What I'm saying is this is not fair to the families that live in those areas. And let me also make this real clear. This is widespread. This is not just Central. It's where it's the worst. But it's across the entire city. I walk on the tramway bike path. I see needles, all kinds of nastiness, because unfortunately the homeless are not very, they don't care about littering. They just leave everything behind. But you have families that are living in this environment, and look at these businesses. First and I-40 is a perfect example. There's a lawnmower repair shop on that corner, and he got stabbed because they were trying to steal his equipment. I'm saying the law enforcement will be used to enforce the law. Novel concept. What I'm saying is we can't let the homeless just do whatever the hell they want to do when it infringes on the rights of us too. I pay taxes, and this is what these businesses are saying. They talk a lot about the Miami model. They talk about what happened in Phoenix. The Miami model is successful because, yes, they've made services available. We've made hundreds of millions of dollars of services available, but that is also coupled with enforcement. And that's all I'm saying, is that we go in and we offer those services. We say to them, we have shelter, we have detox, there's short-term housing, medium-term, I mean, everything you could possibly think of. What I'm saying is, if they turn us down and say, I'm done, I'm just going to stay right here, then we will enforce the law.
Speaking of enforcement, Keller, said that he's using resources, and we have local laws on the books to enforce things like homeless encampments, going after the local business like Quirky Books, for example. That's been in the news cycle lately. They're allowing homeless population to stay in their parking lot. What would you do differently if elected to handle some of these homeless encampments in that business lot, but also other places like the underpass near I-40 and First Street?
Yeah, he talks very passionate about Quirky Books. Well, why does he not care about every place else? Sure, that having those homeless in that parking lot is creating a nuisance for all of the people that live around him. What the hell is different than anywhere in the state? What's different about First and I-40? Here's the thing I don't understand about Mayor Keller. He runs around saying that Darren is, what he wants to do is cruel. First of all, let me say, letting people just die on our streets from overdoses, that's pretty cruel. And that's what's happening right now. But he always says that, Darren, we can't arrest her. How come it is, though, when the balloon fiesta comes to town, miraculously, where'd the homeless go? And I know because I was out there and they weren't there. And now in this election year, the mayor, he says to me, that's why I said I can't understand what he's saying. At one time he says, we're making arrests and we're doing sweeps. But when I want to do it, it's illegal. Here's my point on this. I want to keep our streets clean for everyone, for all of us who live here, not just when we have visitors. And that's what I'm saying. Look, I don't believe a word the mayor says right now. Nothing that comes out of his mouth, because he is so desperate to cling to power. He is in the race of his life. And he knows he's in trouble because people, he said, yes, this last debate that we had, Darren has said the last 4 questions are about crime and homelessness. Duh. It's because 90% of the people told the Journal that is the issue, crime and yes, he was also surprised that many of the issues we talked about, there was a component, usually a large one, of crime and homelessness. And I'm sure he doesn't understand that because he hasn't done anything about it. And he doesn't have results to run on. So he runs on attacking me.
Albuquerque, of course, has a history of dealing with the repercussions of federal action for allegations of violating constitutional rights, right? We think about the McClendon lawsuit that led to significant changes at MDC in terms of jail capacity. Then, of course, there's the DOJ settlement agreement leading to a decade-long reform effort for APD, right? So no matter how you feel about, I think, either of those situations, the facts are, though, those settlements happened and Albuquerque had to deal with the consequence, right, of the allegations. So the feds, of course, saying in their issue with the DOJ reform agreement being that police engaged in a pattern or practice of excessive force that violates the Constitution and federal law. That was from the feds. So I hear some folks say, pushing back on some of the ideas that you've presented, that hasn't the city learned a lot from the reform efforts that they've had to make, whether it's the McClendon lawsuit or the DOJ? There are some who contend that perhaps if they saw that your policies were enacted, that maybe Albuquerque would be sliding back on those reform efforts, or they'd be running right up against the thing that got them in trouble in the first place.
I was the sheriff here for 7 years, and we enforced the law. And we don't want to go back to the mistakes of the past, but we also have to be realistic that in the last 8 years, we've had over 750 murders. You have to go back 16 years prior to Mayor Keller taking over. 16 years to add up that many homicides. We have had 58,000 violent crimes. in the last 8 years. And so, no, we're not going to go back and make mistakes of the past. But what we are going to do is we're going to enforce the law. And that's what law enforcement officers, as I said, we basically, the mayor said, we leave the homeless alone. We're just not going to, PD's not involved in that. PD's not going to do arrests for misdemeanor crimes. Hell, I don't think they make many arrests for misdemeanors, period. And there's an old standard in our business that if you ignore the small crimes, it breeds bigger, more violent crimes. And that's exactly what we've seen here. I talk about proactive policing. So he's saying that when I talk about proactive policing, that's somehow going back to the past. Well, what the hell do you think they're doing? The Sheriff's Department, State Police, and the DA, they're doing proactive policing on Central in Operation Route 66. They've made 1,500 arrests, 15 of those for murder. That's how law enforcement works. You get out there, you stop cars for violations, you find people with warrants, you find people that are up to no good. That's called proactive policing. And basically what it says is, it's a police department that doesn't just respond to calls. It's a police department that tries to prevent the crimes from happening as well.
Yeah. And one thing we know about cities is that a vibrant city is a place that doesn't just deal with crime and homelessness, but also has great investments in quality of life and economic development, to include bringing new jobs in. What do you think about that idea? How do you see any particular types of investments in those realms that the city needs to make if you're elected?
So 2/3 of all jobs that are created in your community they're provided by small business. And we have done a miserable job. And yes, I can do it. When the mayor watches this, he's going to say, did he just say crime and homelessness again? Yes, he did. Because let me tell you what has happened. Businesses are being forced into an environment that is, there's a story that's out now that a woman had to put a sign on her business that says homeless, please don't poop here. That's hard to say. It's like even hard to sit here and tell you that. But that's a sign of the times that we live in. That woman has moved her business 3 times, a candy business. She's moved it 3 times because this problem is so out of control. First of all, we need to clean up our streets. We need to look at, because of the crime and homelessness, we're having insurance rates that are skyrocketing. I talk about this one friend that had a $32,000 a month insurance coverage. It's $132,000 6 years later. It's because it's downtown. And the insurance agent said it's because the crime problem is so bad. So yes, crime and homelessness does affect economic development. I will strive to bring business to Albuquerque, but I don't want somebody coming in from out of state or maybe even out of country to come here that's thinking about investing in Albuquerque, rent a car and drive up Central Avenue because they want to see our business district. And if they do that, they're going to turn around, go back to the airport and leave. And so your welcome mat, which is your business corridor, is vitally important. And so we're just going to clean it up. Now, when I've talked about one of the things that when we talk about economic development, we talk about that housing shortage. And I'll just say one other thing real quick. There's a study that came out. It was in the Albuquerque Journal on Sunday, and it talked about being friendlier to business. But there was a clarion call in that story that said the population of Albuquerque for the first time in 4 years has decreased. I've been here almost 40 years. I never remember our population decreasing. But Rio Rancho's population has increased 10%. Why do you think people are leaving here? Yes, Mayor Keller, one more time. People are fed up. Our streets are violent and vicious. There are homeless that have taken over. So I'm not surprised that people have decided to leave. But, we can do so much better. We can do so much better when it comes to housing, because we do have a high housing crisis. We have so many people that have been priced out of the market. And when you have a crisis like that, why don't we look at things like impact fees? that all of these builders have to, you can't be one of the hardest places to build in your state and think you're going to have an impact on that problem. And so there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to addressing the housing shortage as well. And I want to look at impact fees. I want to look at gross receipts tax. I want to look at the red tape. And most importantly, we've had property taxes triple in some cases in the last year or two. What does that say to your business community, your builders? Well, I can go up the street to Rio Rancho and do the same thing, and I don't have to put up with the same stuff.
If you had to summarize your future potential administration here, what would you want it to be known for? Like, let's say we've made a dent in solving crime or fixing the crime issue, or we've invested in all these public spaces. What would you say is the mission for your future potential administration?
Yeah, we go in and we clean it up. 4 years. We're going to have to be busy every single day. I say all the time that Albuquerque is a tipping point. I used to say that before I knew that our population declined, because that is the remnant of a tipping point. And so I just want to get in there. I want to find like-minded people. I don't care what party they come from. I want them to have the same passion as I do to make sure we can turn our city around, because it's got to be one that we can all be proud of. Us, the people that live here every single day. And I know that families live in fear. I know that businesses are surviving. I have talked to many of whom said, the hell with it, I'm leaving. And so I want them to look in 4 years later and go, damn, he did that. And he got out like he said he was going to, because I am.
30 seconds left. Darren White, any final messages for voters?
No, please. If you think Mayor Keller has made our city safer, if you think he's made our city cleaner, then you should vote for him. I'm not your guy. But if you want to turn the city around and you want it to be something you can be more proud of, I'm your guy. Vote for me. I'm Darren White, and I respectfully ask for your vote.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
We're here with Albuquerque's incumbent mayor, Tim Keller, who is seeking a third term in office. We are in runoff territory, and just as you predicted last time you were here, we would probably be at this point. Welcome back, and thanks for being here.
Great to be on. Great coverage so far of all the election. I think we're 9 months in.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And a similar format, but this time we are going to give you 20 minutes here, and we're going to give each candidate here equal time for you and your opponent here. So the first question, Mayor Keller, you got 36% of the vote on Election Day, and while the city race is nonpartisan, there were several Democratic candidates on the ballot that we know, liberal-leaning candidates. One perspective on the results is more than 60% of voters picked someone else, including nearly 20% who chose the progressive candidate, former U.S. Attorney Alex Ubaez, and notably he has withheld his official endorsement from you. What do those results mean to you that there was a significant number of Burqueño voters that picked other people? What does that say to you, and also the withholding of that endorsement, if anything?
Well, I think first on the results, the important thing, I think there are some just democracy basics. Like, we got the most votes of any other candidate, and that's always a good thing, right? I wouldn't trade that spot for any other outcome. Now, I understand, though, that people are looking for choices, and I actually respect that. These are tough times. And I know that, I've been the incumbent, I've been in office a while and so forth. So I completely understand that, folks were looking around for other candidates. And I think that's okay. I think that's why we have the system that we do. And it makes sense, actually, that I prefer ranked choice voting, which would just have done it faster. But a runoff is just a slow ranked choice voting. And so at the end of the day, it still would have come down to myself, actually, and Darren. And so I think now, though, folks have a really stark choice. And at the end of the day, it's really a choice between moving backwards into policies that didn't work in the past, or policies that are really aligned with President Trump, or it's about moving forward. And it's about continuing to do the things that we know are working in our city with respect to especially crime, homelessness, alternative response. And I think, too, to your other question, I think that's also what voters who supported other candidates see. I don't really view, this race is not about endorsements really in any way. It's just not going to move the needle on things. These issues are much bigger, I would argue, than even the two candidates running. Like, this is really about the direction that you want in our city, and we just represent two different visions of where we want to go as Burqueños. So that's what this race is about, and I think, the other stuff is sort of more insider baseball type things that doesn't actually really change the outcome of an election.
Yeah, we understand one of the asks of Ubaez to you was to stop homeless encampment sweeps. Just to address that issue once more and clarify for voters, what will you do about the ever-present homeless encampments in the city if you're elected to another 4-year term?
Well, we have to have a balanced approach on this. And I think that's something that I've always said. And it's hard because it's not popular on the far ends of either spectrum, right? So sure, there are people who want, all tents gone on day one, right? And that is extremely dangerous. It's illegal. You literally, because there are, first off, we do enforcement, and I'll talk about that, but let me just paint the spectrums, right? If we do nothing, like imagine what our city would look like, because we actually clean thousands of camps every month. And we do try and keep our public spaces safe for the public and clean for the public. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And so on one end of the spectrum, it's like, imagine if we didn't do that, like how we would just lose the public domain. We wouldn't have it anymore all over our city, whether it's parks or sidewalks and things like that. Then in the other perspective, like the answer clearly is not to arrest everyone. First off, you don't have legal grounds for that. It's not illegal to be homeless. And if you do enforce our laws like we do in our parks, folks just have to move. They don't get sent to jail. And also, we only have 200 beds in our jail, so that doesn't make sense either. And we also have more important violent crime to fight. So anyway, my point is, you have to do both. You have to do both, and that's why it's hard. I think that's why it's easy to take one side of that question or the other. That's the easy way out as a candidate. And I think that's something also an incumbent who at least is being honest with everyone. You got to tell the truth. You got to do both. You got to clean these encampments. You got to find people help and ways off the street, and you have to enforce the laws, which we do. Even on narcotics usage, we have hundreds of arrests for narcotics up and down Central. But also, we know people are addicted, and you've got to find them a path off the street into some sort of help, like addiction treatment, so that they don't go back on the street. And we also need reform on the, alternative court side. So I've been clear that, we need much more diversion programs, and we need all flavors of it. And that's something the legislature and the governor have got to work through. So we desperately need that. But again, the easy answer on this for either end of the spectrum is just either wrong, immoral, or impractical, or bad for our city. So you have to do both. And that's why it does take a little while to even answer that question. But it's also just telling people the truth.
You and Darren White have debated each other on all 3 news stations by the time that we're publishing this episode, including on a KRQE debate on December 1st. One of the criticism that has come around again and again is that you haven't, quote, taken the gloves off, so to speak, as it relates to homelessness. And I want to know just how you respond to that critique. It plays into a little bit of what we were just talking about, obviously, but how do you respond to this idea that you haven't done enough to manage the homeless problem, that you haven't gotten aggressive enough?
Well, let's be really clear. I think you actually kind of turned that phrase. Darren White said he will take the gloves off on the homeless. Right. That's what he said. He didn't say anything about me. And I think that is the point. He literally arrested people who were serving food to the homeless when he was in charge of public safety in Albuquerque. And this is not the first time he's done this. He said also that we have to unshackle the police. And this is what led to the DOJ coming in. We had these horrific shootings. The Torres shooting, where a guy was totally unarmed in his backyard, shot 3 times in the back by APD. And Darren White literally was the justification in court for those actions. And it was his words that saying, it's time that we unshackle the police. And so make no mistake, he is very clear what he wants to do. He supports ICE, he supports pulling you over more, and he supports targeting immigrants and homeless and arresting them. And so, yeah, I do not support any of those things. And that is what he represents. That's what his track record is about. And that's why I think our city has to be very careful. If we want to go into that kind of chaos, then, that's the path that you can vote for. But there's an alternative. There's an alternative that does real work, tries to solve decades-old problems, and we know it's working. We've got 1,000 people housed every night. When I came in, we housed 0. Can you imagine if there were another 1,000 people on our street? So, and those folks are actually getting help in housing. So, you have to run a whole city. You can't just say you're going to arrest your way out of every single problem. And that's literally what he's referring to.
Along the lines, though, of doing more to address the problem, I mean, I remember in your State of the City address, you had talked about the idea of doubling down on some of the initiatives. What is holding the city back from moving faster? Because I think that's where a lot of the criticism lies, right, is that people just don't see the results fast enough. I understand what you're saying, like there are some systemic issues that end up being more of a long game, but what can you do? Is there anything that you feel is holding the city back, or what can you do to address more of that concern that is sort of in the short term?
Well, I'll give you an example. When I came in, our police department was falling apart, and in part because of Darren's policies. Literally, officers were leaving in droves. We were under a DOJ consent decree, and crime was going up in every category. Now, you might say it's taken you 8 years to fix that. That's a fair criticism. I wish it would have happened faster too, but real change takes time. This isn't just the flip of a switch. Like, you have to hire and train hundreds of new officers. You had to get through the DOJ reform process, which involved completely transforming how APD works. You have to restore trust in the rank and file, trust in the community, and you have to bring crime down. We are now doing all of those things. For the first time in 10 years, every crime category is down. And I know we may not feel safer. I understand that. I actually feel the same way, that I don't feel any safer when I'm out in the community with our kids. But I know if we continue those statistics for another 2 years or so, we are all going to feel safer. And we know it's working. It's technology and it's civilians. So what takes time? That's your question. Look, I had to build an entire new department, the community safety department of social workers, and dial them into the 911 system so that they take responses so police don't have to, so they're freed up to fight violent crime. They now take over 100,000 calls a year, freeing up officers. I had to build a technology crime fighting platform, gunshot detection, 10,000 cameras, automated speed enforcement, buy a drone fleet. All of these things we've put in place in 20% of the city. And we're seeing drastic crime reductions in those areas, and that's what's driving the stats. I need it in 100% of the city. So yeah, it takes time, but the thing is, we actually finally know it's working. So that's why we should keep going forward.
Another question, speaking to the issue of homelessness, Quirky Books has been, in the news cycle lately. It's a local business here in Albuquerque that allows homeless people to live in a contained area on their premises, essentially in the parking lot of the bookstore. The city's taken legal action against the owner and his property, most recently in a court filing arguing the city and nearby residents will, quote, suffer irreparable harm if the property continues to operate. And the property has been cited for violating city ordinances like Albuquerque's prohibition on outdoor storage, restrictions on overnight camping. So some might look at this action by the city and wonder, well, why hasn't the city taken similar steps in other areas where homeless camps are prevalent, like, say, near I-40 and First Street, where a lot of those business owners and residents have been very vocal about complaining about those homeless encampments. It seems like enforcement isn't being equally distributed. What do you say to those criticisms?
There's a very clear reason why, and it's the difference between public and private property. And so, again, I want to level with people and tell them the truth. Like, even the police cannot go onto private property and arrest people unless they have the legal ability to do that. And so that's the difference. Quirky Books is private property. First and Arvada is not. And frankly, anyone, not just the unhoused, but anyone has a level of rights to be in places and do certain things on public property. Now, First and Arvada, though, just so you know, we just had 45 arrests at First and Arvada. So here again, like, we work on this issue. It's just a huge issue. So the difference is with Quirky Books, we want to have safe outdoor spaces. I support those. And I think that's what we need in our city, because it allows us to be able to have alternatives and multiple forms of places people can go where we can get them help and get them off the street and get them off drugs. Now, you can't have a safe outdoor space just by saying that you want one, because here again, there are laws that apply. And there is a city council law that says that what Quirky Books is doing is illegal. And so what we did is we gave them time to try and become like a real safe outdoor space that has all the things that the law requires. They wouldn't do it. And when they wouldn't do it, then we said, okay, we got to close you down. And they actually lawyered up and they did their thing, and they're defending their private property rights. And they have won in previous appeals that we've made, saying that we can't come onto their property and arrest people. So that's why we now filed an emergency order, because there was a homicide there. I mean, this is out of control, but yet that owner is essentially harboring folks who are doing illegal activity. But we can't go in there without a warrant. And so we really just want a warrant. That's what it comes down to. And so that's why we're waiting on the judge to do that. So here again, like, we will enforce our laws, but we're not going to break laws just to enforce other laws. And I think that's what you see my opponent wanting to do. You know, he says he would just storm in there and arrest everyone. That is patently illegal. That will lead to millions and millions of dollars of lawsuits, just like it did when he was in charge of our city before. We ended up paying $130 million out in DOJ fees for the kind of mess that he got us into. And this Quirky Books is a good example. We're not going to owe anyone any money, and we're going to do the right thing because we're following the law.
I want to turn to immigration. It's obviously another big issue where strategies are very different between you and your opponent. You've said you'll protect immigrants and keep the city's immigrant-friendly status, that it's not APD's job to pass along information to ICE as well. What do you say to people who wonder, well, if MDC shared arrest information with immigration authorities, wouldn't it just make people safer?
So, you know, some of your paraphrasing, by the way, is not actually what I've said, just so you know.
Okay.
The sanctuary city policy, which for us is an immigrant-friendly policy, is very clear. It just says that APD does not obtain or ask or collect for any immigrant paperwork or status information. See, what you said is different. APD does not have the ability to share anything with anyone because they don't collect it. And this distinction is really important because that is why people feel safe to call APD. No matter who I am, if I am in danger, I think you should be able to call the police and not be afraid of being deported or having someone in your house deported. And that is exactly why we have this policy, so that they know when the police come to their house that justice will be done, in a sense that somebody who's doing wrong will be arrested and other folks aren't going to be checked for status and deported. So that's what our policy is. It's totally different than the way you articulated it. And it's also designed because, you know, think of we know in restaurants in Albuquerque, I know of one on Central where, you know, ICE just runs in there and detained U.S. citizens. And so who are they supposed to call in that situation? We want them to call the police so that at least we can clarify that it's ICE and not APD, and then get them in touch with the proper legal defense that they deserve. And so this policy is critical to defending our families and making literally everyone safe in Albuquerque.
But the idea that Darren White has brought up, why don't you just, allow ICE into MDC so that they can, be checking people's statuses as they're arrested or put in the criminal justice system, if you will. What do you think of those ideas, and how does the city policy operate around that?
I think that's another important distinction. You've got to know as mayor what you're in charge of and what you're not. The mayor's not in charge of MDC. The policy articulated has nothing to do with MDC. So, maybe Darren should run for county commissioner because that's where that policy would apply. And the county actually just passed an ordinance that does not allow that. But again, that's the county commission. And so, you can like that idea or not, but you're running for the wrong office if you think you're going to change it.
Construction timelines, also want to talk about the economy. Those take a long time, and I know it's a big reason why you said you wanted to run for a third term to finish some of these big projects. So with another 4-year term, what kind of economic growth do you see for Albuquerque actually able to come to fruition?
Well, we know that the economy is actually doing well. Wages are up since I've been in office by about 30%. GDP is also up. And we know that the economy is growing. And it's in part because of what we're doing around innovative technologies like fusion. And this is Pacific Fusion, which is coming in, and that's supposed to be 300 jobs. It's about $1 billion of investment. It started maybe 5-6 years ago when I got Netflix here. And so we've been able to bring in some big employers, but we're also trying to help with small business. And small business needs places where families can live, work, and play. And that means if it's a restaurant or if it's a retail shop, that we create these community hubs in our city. And we have some of them that we know and love, like Nob Hill, or like Old Town. The issue is we're a Western city, and we were never really built with those throughout the city like most other cities have. So that's why we're trying to have more of these areas. So we're building Nuevo Atrisco, which is an amazing sort of live, work, play food court location on the west side that's awesome. We're supporting everything from Green Jeans to Tin Can Alley to the bridges. Folks know where some of these things are. We need dozens of these all over the city, and also downtown, which is why we supported and crafted the Ex Novo Arrive Hotel combination that makes 7th and Central. It's like cool, it's fun, it's safe, it's vibrant, and it's also economically prospering. And so that's what we need more of, and that's what I'll do on that front.
We know there's a lot of hot takes out there about, how folks may summarize, say, the Keller administration. So in 8 years, how do you summarize what your administration has done? Is it, say, something like a mission statement of we are working on putting a huge dent in crime, or is it we've beautified all of these public spaces? How do you summarize what you've done in 8 years?
Sure. I think we've took on tough issues head on, and we've tried to address them in a real way, not in a token way. We have literally rebuilt a police department. We have built from scratch a system that takes care of the homeless. I know we have to do more in all of these fronts. And we have created these places like the ones I just mentioned, whether it's C&M Academy at the rail yards or it's the rail trail. We have a vision for bigger places for our families. And that is something that is a work in progress. I understand that. But I think it's the real work that we need. That's what my administration has been all about. And it's about dealing with these deep-seated issues that have held us back, I think, for decades. We could have not had a police department that was messed up, and we could have built a homeless system before I got here. I mean, these were all things actually Darren White had the opportunity to work on when he ran the city. So at the end of the day, I think it comes down to confidence. And I think that people in general, even if they disagree or even if they're frustrated, they have confidence that we are doing the right thing and we're going in the right direction. And I do think that stands in sharp contrast to my opponent. I mean, that's what this race is about. He has had literally a no confidence vote from the Albuquerque Police Department when he was in charge. He had a no confidence vote when he was in charge of the state police department. And I think people do not have confidence in going backwards or in bringing in Trump-style policies to Albuquerque. So that's how I would summarize this choice in our administration.
We got about 1 minute left on the clock for you, Mayor Keller. Any final closing thoughts for voters?
I think number one is make sure and vote. There is an election on December 9th. It's an odd date and so forth, in a sense that most folks, can forget there's an election because Christmas is coming and Thanksgiving over and all those kinds of things. So definitely remember and vote, because no matter what the outcome is, it's always better if more people vote, just to make sure that it really represents our city. And the last thing I would just share is the other difference in this election is, I love our city and I'll fight for our city. I don't shame our city. I don't talk down to our city. And we need, in general, a mayor who is always an ambassador of what is good and trying to fix what is bad. And I think that's the other thing people hopefully would agree that I've done and will continue to do.
One last question for you. You mentioned ranked choice voting. Is that something you'd like to add to the ideas of something you check in with or like to pursue?
I ran it twice already and it hasn't passed. So this is a good one. It's all up to city council. I've supported ranked choice voting for over a decade.
Interesting.
Thank you, Mayor Keller.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our two mayoral candidates here in Albuquerque, Darren White and Tim Keller, for taking the time to come back to our show. We really appreciate them giving us the time, and for voters to hear from them, I think, for the last time before voting.
Yeah, certainly. And we have the full version of a debate between these two candidates that will be online at krqe.com. We encourage you to check that out now, especially if you have not cast a ballot. And let us know if you have any other ideas for our podcast. I'm at chris.mckee, krqe.com, also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart at krqe.com via email, and gburknm on social media. Thank you all for listening and watching.